What's going on, everybody? The Campfire is done is for patch 1.1.1 in Diablo 4 Season 1, and I gotta say, for the most part, everything was really good. The devs are definitely listening to the community. They're buffing things that need buffed. They're making changes to other things and reverting a few changes that honestly just hurt the quality of life of the game. Overall, I definitely think it was very positive. It does show that we are going in the right direction, that they do have good long-term goals for this game. And overall, I think everybody is going to be very pleased with this patch when it hits on August 8th. It will be going live on the 8th. Full patch notes will be out on August 2nd. The things I'm going to go over today, about 90% of them, they said, will be implemented in the game. Some things won't be. That just depends because they are still going through testing, so just remember that when reading stuff off. Some of the changes to classes will not be implemented in the game. However, they did say the greater majority will, so it gives us a good overview as to what's coming on August 8th. Now, barbarians and sorcerers were definitely the main focus of this patch that's going to be incoming, as they had previously stated. For barbarians, they really wanted to improve the early game by buffing the amount of fury regeneration that barbs have, but then also improving the late game by buffing some of the uniques that are honestly just completely useless for them currently, by changing their stats and also the effects. Now, the few examples that they showed doesn't look like the biggest change in the world, but definitely should feel nicer for those barbarian mains getting into the later game. Now, as far as our sorcerers go, they wanted to get rid of what they called the Kiss Curse mechanic. So when you do a ton of damage with one ability, it takes away and hurts you in another spot. And they said that they went too deep into that on the patch going into Season 1. So they want to revert a few of those things, buff a couple other things. They want to make it so that it doesn't seem so impactful, the stuff that you lose. And maybe it's not quite as overpowered, the stuff that you gain. Help balance that out a little bit. They also want to improve the mid to late game survivability. So they made some decent changes in the Paragon board as far as being able to put points in so that you can get that survivability and the tankiness going into the late game and doing those higher tier nightmare dungeons. And I know a lot of people in chat said that they don't like having to take Paragon board points away just so that they can get some survivability. However, sorcerers were already the most played class in preseason. If they went ahead and buffed survivability through the roof and didn't make any changes to the Paragon board, they would be too overpowered. I do like what they're doing here, and they are trying to make everything a little bit more relevant so that all 5 classes have an even feel, and it's whatever storyline that you want to go down. So now, yes, you're going to have to sacrifice a little bit of damage on your sorcerer, but you're going to get that survivability, and in my opinion, that does put them in a pretty good place. We'll go more in depth in a minute over exactly what they did to every single class. Every class did get a buff in some kind of way. I do just want to cover the smaller things that they're changing first. They do feel like uniques across the board are pretty underwhelming. A lot of players aren't really utilizing them. They feel like a lot of the drawbacks from putting the uniques on definitely overshadow the benefit that you get from said unique. So a lot of uniques in this patch and beyond are going to be getting some reworks, which I'm excited to see because honestly, I haven't really thrown a single unique on so far this season. So I'd like to see the changes that they make there. They also realize that vulnerable and crit are a little bit too much of a handicap in the game right now. Literally everybody builds for vulnerable and crit damage. They want to make other things like damage over time and overpowered damage scale late game so that there's more variety in builds. They're going to make some minor changes going into this patch, but that is something into the future they're going to continue to work on. Another change that I really do like, because even though it is easy to mindlessly just build for vuln damage and for crit damage, it would be nice to have damage over time be relevant, or maybe to be able to build for overpowered with certain classes. So I do like the fact that they are giving us more playstyles going into the future. They also feel like ultimate skill damage really isn't as strong as it could be. Most people are proccing ultimate skills like Bone Spear just for the buff that they get, not really using ultimates to clear the entire map. Another thing I definitely agree with. Now, this won't happen in the current patch coming out, but that is something they will be working on into the future. I mean, if I pop my ult, I really want to be meaningful. I do want to have it impact the game a lot more than it does. So I don't know exactly what they're going to do here, how they're going to balance that, what mechanics they will change. That's another one coming in the future. A change that I absolutely love, and I've been thinking this entire time, is the monster density in Nightmare Dungeons. I just feel like a lot of spots in Nightmare Dungeons, there really aren't that many mobs. So not only did they go ahead and reduce the amount of XP that we get, before, anything that's 3 levels or above, we got 25% more XP. Going into this season, per level up to 10 levels, it was 1.5%. So at 10 levels above, we're only getting 15% more XP. And I feel like there's been less mobs in the Nightmare Dungeons. Maybe it's the same amount, and I'm just noticing the XP difference a little bit. Now, I haven't gone through, and I don't really have a way to count. I guess I could, but I'm not going to. Every single dot on the examples that they showed. But it looks like there's at least a 50% increase in the amount of small mobs that are going to be in Nightmare Dungeons. So no, they're not making a direct change to total XP, like giving us 3% per level up to a max of 30% or 2.5% to equal that 25% at 10 levels above. But with them putting in at least 50% more mobs, that is 50% more mob XP that we're going to be getting if we're clearing full dungeons. And so I do think it will make leveling feel a little bit better. It'll make things go a lot quicker. They don't want to make any direct changes too fast. They want to implement this, check the data out, see how people are feeling about it, and then maybe adjust XP down the line. But at least they are aware of the negative impact that the changes to XP have had, and they are looking to make different ways to fix this. Also, more mobs means more loot means more legendaries means for my poison slide people out there, and honestly anybody running an aspect dependent build, is going to be that much easier for you guys to get those crucial aspects. And that also brings us to the next important thing, well, really two of them, and that is the change to bosses loot. So starting at level 35, you'll get a guaranteed legendary drop from a defeated dungeon boss, completing a Legion event and slaying the butcher. But on top of that, starting at level 15, every time you kill the treasure goblin, you're guaranteed a legendary as well. Now, I think that this is going to be a huge change for your casual player. You know, the people who play nonstop, it might not really affect them as much because they're cranking through levels, they're getting a ton of gear. But for the people who only have a few hours a day to play, it's going to feel much more rewarding to them. I absolutely love the change to the treasure goblins because I do feel like they're underwhelming. They claim that it has a 50% drop rate on legendaries when you kill them. And they made the example, you know, you can flip a coin 7 times in a row and get tails every time. And maybe I'm just that guy that gets tails every time. I don't know what I did in a previous life for gaming RNGesus to hate me so much, but I hardly ever get legendaries out of the treasure goblin. So that is a change that I definitely do like. Then also we have the respec patch incoming with this current patch. It's going to be 40% cheaper for us to go ahead and respec, so you can change up builds and it not completely break the bank. Nice little quality of life change. The stash change is coming in as well. They're not giving it to you for free, but it's only 400,000 gold, which honestly, if you're running Nightmare Dungeons, that's like half a Nightmare Dungeon, maybe a full Nightmare Dungeon, but really in the scheme of things, that's not that bad. With elixirs, you're now going to be able to stack 99 of them. Another nice quality of life change. I don't think I've ever ran into that issue where I had 99 of any elixir. I'm popping them on cooldown, whether I need them or not, just for the 5% XP. But again, maybe through the course of a whole season, you will start to stack those up, spread across a bunch of alts. I don't know. It's a small change, but I can see why it would be good. This next change I feel like is for the hardcore players, and they are going to love this. For me, it's just been kind of annoying because it takes longer. Going into season 1, they changed it where if you are leaving a dungeon it takes 5 seconds for you to go ahead and cast that instead of 3 seconds. So I know a lot of people on hardcore have died because they try to pop their escape scroll, but it takes too long for it to go off. It ends up getting canceled or they get bodied and they die. Now they are reverting that back to 3 seconds, so players don't have to worry about that. Again, if you're a softcore player, the extra 2 seconds isn't the end of the world, but it does slow things down. If you're a hardcore player, that helps you get out of dodge when you really need to, that much easier. And I do think that that is a good change, especially given the fact that there are still game crashes, server issues. You don't need to give hardcore players another reason to die that's out of their control. But the last change, and probably my favorite change, is the Nightmare Dungeon Affliction changes. So they are getting rid of some of the affixes on Nightmare Dungeons that I completely hate. There are some that you see them and you just go ahead and scrap them. You get your sigil powder for them and you're never going to touch them. The 3 that they are getting rid of is the resource drain, which is, I don't know who thought of that, but if that guy got fired, I really wouldn't be mad. Then the cold enchantment, which they did nerf it going into the season, and I will say it hasn't been as brutal as in preseason. I'm also not going to complain seeing that one go. And then also Backstabber, where if an enemy attacks you from behind, they do 150% extra damage. Now, I haven't done any crazy high tier dungeons. I've only made it into like the mid 40s so far because I am leveling and there's really no point for me to push those higher tiers because of the XP loss. But I have seen a few instances where they just do a ridiculous amount of damage, way more than they should. That actually happened to me in the dungeon I was doing right before the patch, before the campfire. I got one shot by somebody I should have never gotten one shot by. It really didn't make any sense. Again, we play softcore. I wasn't really that mad about it. I had to run a little bit to get back that spot. I bodied the dude and it was fine. But I do like that they recognize some of these are a little bit too strong and they want to rework them or completely remove them. Just another thing for quality of life. They realize that a ton of people hate these changes. They're not good for the overall flow of the game. So they're just going to remove them for now and try to find a good balanced rework. All right, now as far as class changes go, Barbarians did see a nice buff to their early game. They added Fury, increased Fury that you gain from just about every single one of their abilities, making it so the early game isn't quite as rough. You can spam your attacks more, level a little bit quicker, and not have to worry about dying so much. They also buffed it so with Mighty Charge, vulnerable duration increased from 2 to 4 seconds, Enhanced Charge, damage increased from 30 to 60%, definitely adding in a little bit more of that early game damage. Then for their skills, Upheaval, Violent Upheaval, changes to if Upheaval damages at least 2 enemies or a boss, you gain Berserking for 2 seconds, increased to 3 if it damages at least 4 enemies. Before, that wouldn't proc on bosses, so this definitely helps more in the late game. That way you can solo bosses, and then it gives you a little bit of an additional perk if you're using it on mobs and you're damaging 4 or more enemies. They buffed the passives as well, a little bit across the board. We saw some damage reduction increases. We saw some critical damage bonuses to Gushing Wounds, where you get a 15% crit damage bonus, then bleed damage when overpowering increased from 11% all the way to 70%, which is a huge buff. I don't run a barbarian, so I don't know how much of a change that is for them, but just looking at stats on paper, it does look pretty good. Then legendaries across the board seem to have gotten a buff about 15 to 20% to their damage, which should make them more relevant. They seem to have made the biggest deal out of the changes to Earthquake's aspect of Volcathos and just Earthquake aspect. Both of those got buffed from 5 to 15% increased damage bonus to 15 to 25, which is definitely a huge buff. I think they're trying to make more builds all around, as you'll see later on in the patch notes, more relevant. So people aren't just stuck to one meta build for every single class. I do think they want to add a lot of variation to help keep things fresh and fun. And then also for the uniques, all of the uniques got some type of rework, whether it's more damage, changing the affixes, having CDR. Everything's getting a little bit of a rework to make them stronger for the Barbarian. Overall, definitely a W patch for the Barbarian, and I think people will be very happy. Druids, we didn't get too much love, but we didn't get any hate. If you like the Poison Landslide, don't worry, you are safe. We're at least safe until the next patch, and that probably won't be for a solid 6 weeks. So we got plenty of time to go ahead and enjoy this. The biggest thing that they did was they buffed Spirit to make early game leveling feel a little bit better. Everything went up by about 1 to 2 Spirit gain increase when you're using your melees. Not the biggest change in the world, but a nice quality of life. And then they went ahead and they buffed companions across the board. They buffed everything about wolves. They buffed ravens, and they buffed the rabies. Damage over time increased from 76% to 110, which is definitely a huge change. That plays into some of the aspects. I think that instead of nerfing the Poison Landslide, they want to make companion builds more relevant. So now you can go like a normal landslide, you can go the lightning werewolf, you can do the poison landslide, and I'm sure when this patch hits, and we'll definitely be doing some testing, there's probably going to be some pretty nasty companion builds coming out. So I am excited to try that. Always down to switch things up. Obviously, we do love the poison landslide the most right now, but if we are able to switch things up, all for the better. As far as our legendaries went, aspect of metamorphic stone, spirit cost reduced by 10, damage dealt increased from 80 to 100 to 100% to 120%. Alpha damage increased from 75 to 100 to 90 to 115. And then mangled resource gained increased from 1 to 3. Not huge changes, but nice little buffs. Not anything that's going to make it broken, but at least we did get some love. And then also for the class mechanic, Overload, lucky hit chance increased from 20 to 40%, which, that will actually be nice for the Poison Landslide build. Necros, they didn't really change too much. They fixed something on the Sever builds where the crit scaling with the pools that they put down just don't really make any sense. They don't scale together. So aspect of Torment, Essence Regeneration increased from 20 to 30% to 90 to 70%. Aspect of Decay, damage increased from 20 to 40 to 25 to 45. Hulking aspect, legendary category changed from resource to utility. That way you can throw it on some boots or something like that. You don't have to give up a ring slot or a piece of armor slot. You can throw it on something less used and still be able to take advantage of it. This one is for the Golem. Chance for Golem to reduce its cooldown increased to 1 to 4 from 1 to 4% to 2 to 5%. Chance to Golem to spawn a corpse increased from 0.5% to 2% to 1 to 2.5%. Again, not the biggest buffs in the world, but good workarounds. The aspect of Torment is definitely the biggest one here, and they did admit and recognize that that was just kind of botched from the start. Rogues got a little bit more love, mainly to the marksman classes. The two biggest for their skills, Invigorating Strike, Fundamental Invigorating Strike, Energy Threshold increase from 50 to 75%, and then Forceful Arrow. Primary Forceful Arrow, the change to every third cast pierces enemies. For their passives, Victimize is up 10% on the lucky hit chance. Rugged damage reduction against damage over time increased by from 6, 12, 18 to 9, 18, 27. Siphoning, lucky hit chance from 75 to 85. A couple of small legendary changes. Aspect of Elusive Menace no longer requires hits to be from close enemies. And then Quickening Fog, you automatically drop a smoke grenade at the end of dash. Smoke grenades reduce dash's cooldown by 0.4 to 0.6 seconds per target, up to 2 to 3 seconds. Just little quality of life things. For sorcerers, they didn't see too much in skills. They saw a little bit, so the Fireball, now its radius is bigger, and it does 20 to 30% more critical strike damage if it hits 1 to 2 players, or 3 or more mobs, or bosses, or elites. Chain Lightning, it got a 5% increased damage each time that it bounces. Destructive Chain Lightning, Crackling Energy increased from 25 to 30%. But the more notable changes for the Sorks came in passives in the Paragon and the Legendaries. For passives, the biggest one for me is Esu's Ferocity. Both bonuses are also granted for 3 seconds when hitting a boss with a critical strike, which is definitely going to be huge for being able to utilize that against a boss. The Paragon, basically, you saw buffs across the board by about, depending which one it is, anywhere from 1 to 5% on anything that has to do with damage reduction. And that also, then if you get it twice on a board, puts anything from 2 to 10% buff going forward. Yes, you are going to have to give up a little bit of your damage utility with the Paragon, but if you want that late game survivability, sorcerers still already melt anyways. I definitely think that is the happy balance, happy medium of making them efficient in the late game, but not just insanely broken. The legendaries got changed across the board. I mean, honestly, the sorcerers have a lot of stuff coming. I don't know everything that obviously is going to be implemented, but whether it's movement speed, it's burning damage, it is resources, everything got a nice buff. I think some of the biggest ones are Serpentine aspect change. You may have one additional Hydra active, and Hydra's duration is increased by 14 to 24%. This now also affects Hydra's enchantment effect, which is huge because they took away from that a lot going into this patch. Now they're reverting it and also actually buffing it. Then gravitational aspect, ball lightning orbits around you and deals 15 to 25% increased damage. Once again, helping out the chain lightning. Then also recharging aspect, each time chain lightning bounces, you gain 2 to 3 mana. So it doesn't just have to be off of you, it can be off of anything or any enemy, and you're gaining that mana back, so your mana issues shouldn't be such a issue. Honestly, Chain Lightning saw the biggest buff out of anybody in this patch. It was already probably the best way to level your sword, but once this patch is implemented, I can't imagine that anybody who's running a sword will use anything else, at least from level 1 to 50, until you get to your Paragon board, and then maybe you want to respec into other things. We also saw a few smaller changes. Necros are going to love this. If companions become more of a thing for druids, they will as well. They are changing the amount of damage that companions and minions take from certain bosses. They went ahead and they saw the data. They saw that minions were just dying way too quickly to a lot of bosses. They do want them to be more incorporated into the game. So they're making a small change there, which is going to be nice. Caged Heart of Spellbreaking. Upon taking elemental damage, gained 10 to 20% damage reduction for 5 seconds. So it's not so dependent on you reducing elemental damage back. Now it's just damage reduction as a whole, which definitely is a really nice buff. Then Temerity might have just become the best pants in the game, depending what class you are running. But these things are going to be insane for unique item. Instead of having plus all stats, they're changing that with max life. The barrier is now based upon maximum life and now properly accounted by conditions, checking for the player having a barrier, so they should stack. These things went from being pretty good if you want to run them to, in my opinion, definitely going to be some of the, if not the best pants in the game. I hope that gives everybody a nice idea as to what's coming on August 8th. Again, on the 2nd, the full patch notes will be out. Everybody will be able to read through them. I didn't completely read down the list and everything because we don't know what exactly is going to be there. Just want to give people a broad overview as to what's coming, save you guys an hour of time watching the campfire, try to condense it all down for you, give you a nice idea of what we have in store for us, and then we'll all be able to play it on August 8th. But guys, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like, leave a comment, and most of all, subscribe to the channel.